Welcome to the Vision Dev podcast, where entrepreneurs, innovators, and creators come to us to not only share their stories, but also their mindset, the strategies, and the tools behind their great accomplishments. Hi, my name is Leo Burnett. I'm the co-founder of Vision Dev, our real estate private equity firm. And on our journey to build our dream portfolio, I like to interview entrepreneurs and other successful people to better understand their journey and learn lessons that can help us better run our business and just be better people in general. Our guest today is the new chairman of Tiger 21. He's a very successful real estate investor and developer, and more recently, a Top Gun business coach and consultant. I'm very excited to share this episode because Randall Ettinger is a good friend, and even though he'd probably be turned off being called this way, an important mentor in my life and in Vision Dev's history. On this absolutely fascinating episode that lasts for more than 2 hours, like our longest episode so far, we discuss on a wide variety of topics ranging from personal growth to the allegory of the summit, economics, finding yourself and your values, taking a break in life to recalibrate your internal compass, the illusion of control, and much more on the overlap between personal life and the business life. You will not want to miss this excellent episode. Randall, thanks for being here.
Leo, it's great to be here.
Once again, I'm expecting a wonderful talk with you. You've been a mentor to us for years. We're actually sitting in your old office.
Yes,
so
we're
that's
8 feet under in my old office.
Yeah, we're 8 feet under. So it's kind of nice to record one of these conversations for once and share it with everyone. I think you have great knowledge to share, great wisdom as well, great stories. So
I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah. You're not the most public person. Perhaps some people might not know who you are. So it'd be nice to have a bit about your journey up until here, from where you started to where you are now. Let's start with like your childhood. Have you always pictured yourself as a future entrepreneur? When did that become a reality to you?
So the first thing, it's funny you say that, most people don't know about me and I'm not very public, because I think that I haven't had a social media account in about 10 years. That means no Facebook, no Instagram, no TikTok, no Snapchat. I'm sure there were other ones that came and went in that time, but I haven't had any social media accounts. So by and large,
Even on LinkedIn, you're not very active.
No, by and large, rightly or wrongly, I tend to restrict my relationships and interactions to real people in the real world and one-on-one. But coming back to that first question about, did I always see myself as an entrepreneur? I mean, I don't think I had the word entrepreneur in my mind when I was younger, but I do remember many times looking around myself and saying, these people are not like me. Why is everybody able to sit down in their chair and focus? Why is everybody, able to just learn to the test? Why is everybody just satisfied with, if I, tick all these boxes, I'm going to get 100% mark. I'm going to get a cookie, right? And I always felt like there was something unsettling about that. But I think when you're younger, you don't have words to verbalize or articulate a lot of the things you feel. You just have these feelings. But as you get older, you start to surround yourself with people in different environments, and you start to realize, oh, wait, there's something different about me. And I always come back to something that was one of the most honest things somebody ever told me. It was one of my first jobs after my MBA, and it was a huge open environment. There were like 300 people in a huge open office plan. My cubicle mate, his name was Matthew. And we were talking about, not liking the company and wanting to do other things and wanting to go elsewhere. We chatted a lot, as cubicle mates do. And he said something to me I'll never forget. He said, Randall, wherever I go, I just want someone to tell me what to do. And it was so honest. I'm like, wow, most people really are like that. Most people want to, play follow the leader. And I realized, I'm like, oh, we're going in a different direction. And I haven't checked in on him lately, but I'm going to guess he's probably like a C-level executive somewhere. Someone told him what to do for the last 15 years, I'm sure.
So are you saying you struggled with authority when you were younger? You had trouble following the guidelines? You wanted to make your own way?
I think so. I spent so much time at the principal's office when I was younger that the principal stopped doing la morale. She stopped at one point even giving me the speech. I have a distinct memory of one time being sent down to the principal's office again, probably because I was disrupting. I wasn't listening. I was talking to my friend, and I was brought down to her office, and she saw me and she said, "I don't even have time for this conversation. I'm just going to my meeting. You just stay here." And I figured I'll just make some phone calls. So I got sat in back of her desk and just made some phone calls. Called my dad, called my mom. At that age, I only knew 2 phone numbers, so it was very easy. Dad and mom. But no, I was never, it wasn't, my problem wasn't necessarily authority. My problem was always following the instructions or following the example or leadership of somebody who I didn't admire. There were a few times in my life when I worked for people who I really did admire and I looked up to them. And when they asked me to do something, I could feel that it was part of a bigger plan. And if I didn't, it could sustain a challenge, right? I could poke with a why, and they had a really good answer to why. Mm-hmm. And I could poke with a second why, and they had a really good answer to the second why. Most people,
purpose.
You poke at the first why, and it just deflates. There's nothing there because I said so. No. So it's not about authority. It's about who the leadership is.
And why there's leadership. What's the purpose?
When you admire somebody, you're okay to listen to what they have to say. And that's, I think something I tell people. I said, don't take advice from anybody whose life you don't admire. I know somebody like a 4-time divorced, 4-time remarried person in my family who sometimes gave me relationship advice. And I said, thank you.
And what influence did your parents have on you in terms of becoming a business person or an entrepreneur? Did you want to do what they were doing? Did you want to do things differently?
It's interesting because, both my parents are entrepreneurs, but they came to it through very different lengths. My mom, because she was so afraid of being an entrepreneur, was a teacher for almost 20 years. But her passion was interior design. But she was an elementary and high school teacher. And for economic reasons, she needed the salary, right? We didn't grow up with that much wealth, and so she needed the salary. But over a few years, my father started to earn enough money that he could say, you know what, take the risk. Like, go off, like, be an interior designer. And, in the first year, she made double what she had ever made as a teacher. She loved it. She was allumée. She was lit up. And to this day, my mom, who just turned 65 5 days ago, my mom works 6 days a week. She needs to work exactly 0 days a week, and she works 6 days a week. She loves it. She's serving clients. She's building houses in Outremont and in Westmount and Hampstead, and she loves it, and she's passionate about it. So she had that inside her. It was a little bit stifled. My father also was always an entrepreneur, always had his own business, mostly in real estate. He did commercial and industrial brokerage, mostly industrial. He was really specialized industrial work. And he built a small team where he went, but he was always resistant to authority. And my dad was really strong about being true to himself. And that's something that I really admired. He taught me more about entrepreneurship than anybody else. And I remember one of the formative lessons of my life was when I was about 15 years old, 15, 16. And a very large multinational brokerage came into Montreal. And they wanted to hire my dad to be the executive vice president. And they were going to pay him double what he was making alone. And I was 15, 16. So I said, well, Dad, of course you're going to take it. It's double. Of course you're going to take it. It's so much more money. It was evident to me. And my dad said, well, no. I said, what do you mean? I don't understand. He said, it's just not me. I'm not a corporate guy. I said, I'm not made for that. It's not my stripes. And I was baffled at 15, 16. I didn't understand it. It probably took me a lot longer to understand what it means to be true to yourself. But today, you understand that when you're an entrepreneur, and I'm a member of EO, and I speak with a lot of entrepreneurs, we always joke that we could almost all of us get jobs for like double what we pay ourselves, and none of us would do it because it's innate.
Mm-hmm. And it's trust in your intuition that this is not for you. Not your intuition, you just know yourself and respect what you
Yeah,
know about yourself.
it's less your intuition and like more about being true to your nature. I mean, there are plenty of entrepreneurs out there who are working 9 to 5 jobs and they're making money. They're just miserable because they're not being true to their nature, right? If you take, a penguin and take them out of the penguin habitat at the zoo and put them in the gorilla habitat at the zoo, they're going to be miserable. They might live their entire life. They might survive in the gorilla habitat, but they're penguins. They're not meant to be there. They're not thriving in that environment.
Yeah. So these in your life were the first examples you've had of the importance of being in the right seat and thriving better than surviving. So when did you so you went to university also? What did you study?
I was always a bookworm. So when I graduated high school in CEGEP, I then went to Concordia University. They had a small college called the Liberal Arts College, and it was basically a 3-year great books curriculum. So starting from, let's say, I think we started around probably the New Testament, maybe even before that. So let's say we started around the year 0, give or take, and we moved all the way up to like contemporary 20th century fiction and nonfiction. So that was a 3-year great books, the Western canon curriculum, really multidisciplinary, right? It was literature, it was the history of science, the history of politics, and it was just fascinating.
Sounds fascinating.
It was. It was not a means to an end at all. Nobody comes out of there with a degree to practice something.
It's general knowledge.
Yeah, general interest. And,
So what made you decide to choose this degree?
I was the kid who could not or would not focus in class, but even in grade 5, I would be reading a book this thick under my desk. To me, unless I'm fascinated or curious about something, it's very, very hard to focus. And one of the kind of underlying questions, we all have these questions that inform our lives. And one of the questions I always have is like, how did we get to today? How do we get here to today? How do we get to today in literature? How do we get to today in our political system? How do we get today in our economic system? How do we get to a polarized, capitalist, socialist, Marxist world? How? The world wasn't born yesterday. And I think that was always fascinating to me. So to understand like the arc was something that I was curious about. And I was very, maybe fortunate, or I don't know how to phrase it, but I had very laissez-faire parents. So my parents had no expectations or agenda for me. And they said, if that's what you like, go study that.
That's a blessing.
It really was a blessing. Yes.
I recognize this blessing from my parents as well, to not put any expectations on me and letting me choose and find and explore. And I think that's really something I keep for the next generation. I think that freedom is really important, and if you want to find this purpose you're looking for.
Yeah, I've really thought about that in the context. I have 2 little children. I have a 3.5-year-old and an 18-month-old. So I'm starting the parenting journey. So like everybody else, I've read books, but I'm building my theory of parenting on the fly. But I think one theory of parenting that I've kind of used to inform myself is that the kid I've been given is a seed, right? My son Uri, he's a seed. I don't know if he's an oak seed or a maple seed or a mahogany seed or a pine seed. I don't know yet. And my job is to try to figure out what kind of seed I have. What altitude should it be planted at? How much water does it need? How much sunlight does it need? If you go to If you go to BC, you see they have like the magnificent, the Douglas firs. They're magnificent, magnificent trees, right? And they grow to like, 100 feet more. Those same firs, those same Douglas firs, if you go further out at altitude, they get stumpier and stumpier and stumpier, stunted.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same seed,
But not in its right environment.
stunted. So people might look at that and say like, oh, there's something wrong with that. Something wrong with that tree. But there's nothing wrong with a tree. It's just not in its optimal environment.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of seed do you have? That's a tough question to find for your kid. But I think that's, your job as a parent. You see it already. They have a nature. He's not me. He's not my wife. Who is he? Learning every day.
And letting him move around to find his own terrain.
Sure. I'm just an observer, right? And regardless of what I know about him, whether that's true or not, it's almost irrelevant compared to what he knows about himself. It's the same as, in your life, somebody might say, Leo, they might give you advice. Leo, do this. Leo, do this. Leo, do this. And it goes over you, under you, it goes
depends
through
on
you.
The individual also. You weren't attracted to being told what to do. You wanted to find your own way, but you mentioned the story about your coworker who actually thrived better in an environment with a tighter box and more guidelines and direction, and that's where he'll do best. So that's also where you need to find what kind of seed you're with.
Yeah. I mean, did he thrive? Was it fear-based? Was it honestly based on his nature? I don't know. That's tough to tell. I didn't know him well enough, but certainly the fear instinct wants to be told what to do. Listen, there's a part of me that would love to wake up in the morning and be told what to do and where to go and to be pat on the back and to be held and told like everything's going to be okay. There's a part of everybody that would love to climb back into the womb and feel safe and secure, right? That's in all of us. But like we're out here in the world where there's only one direction. So it's, even though it's an honest desire for everybody on some level, it's not a practical direction to head to.
I was hearing this on a podcast recently that I thought it made a lot of sense. You can choose, if you choose to be an employee, you'll spend your life being frustrated, and if you choose to be an entrepreneur, you'll spend your life being stressed. Pick your poison. There's no perfect fit, but there's going to be one that suits you better. But life is challenging for everyone.
There's some truth in that. There's some truth about choosing your difficult in life, right? I don't know if I would use the word stressed. I think stress can be a choice. I would use more the word uncertain. I think when you choose to be an entrepreneur, you're choosing a sort of question mark, a choose your own adventure. You don't know where it's going to go. I think stressed is a choice.
But don't you think you've been more stressed than the average person throughout your entrepreneurial journey?
Oh my God.
Right.
Yes.
So
yes. I've felt
with maturity
yes.
and experience, you learn to decrease this level of stress. But
definitely. You know what? It's funny you say that, because I think I forget sometimes because I've become so inured to it and so used to it. But I had one employee who told me after a couple of years working with me, she said, how is it you don't have a heart attack? How is it you don't have like an ulcer? I don't understand. She said, I understand like the risks going on in this business. I understand how much you have on your shoulders. How do you not have it? And my only answer to her was, well, every day is a heart attack. So you just get used to it. I'm like, that was kind of my answer. And I realized it's not that it's not stressful. You're right. It's that I've seen so many times, I've been in the Tarzan situation. That's the analogy I use, where I was swinging from one vine and I let go of a vine and the other vine hadn't appeared yet. And I'm just hanging out in midair. And I'm like, is that other vine?
I love this analogy.
Is that other vine going to be a refinancing? Is it going to be a sale? Is there going to be a liquidity? I'm like, because right now I have nothing to catch, right? Obligations are coming that I cannot meet, and I'm just in midair, and it's not a good feeling. It's not. But
And
if
yet
that
you let go
happens,
of the vine.
if that happens a few more times in your life, and every time the vine appears, you start to feel a little more okay in midair. You're like, oh, it'll be okay. You know, like a little bit like the difference when you go to Cirque du Soleil, you see what they're doing and you're scared out of your mind, but they feel relaxed, or they're like, it's coming. You kind of feel like that.
And that comes with experience, I think, because you'll see that you have what it takes to catch another vine every time. Sometimes you fall, but you always figure out a solution. You start trusting in yourself that you'll figure it out. So I guess that's how you manage stress better
Yeah.
over time.
You trust in yourself, and like, I I trust in the universe. I trust outside of myself, right? Like, there's only so much that I could do, but I trust that the forces will be aligned. And the irony in that is like, there have been times when like I didn't catch the vine and I fell and I was not happy. I was miserable. I was upset. I was angry. You know, I think of like one time where I really didn't catch the vine. I was 30 years old and I was trying to build an office tower downtown myself. And I was negotiating the financing, and I was negotiating with the vendors, and I was bringing investors were flying in, and I was trying to raise money all myself, basically. I had no team at the time. And I was putting in money that I didn't have as non-refundable deposits. And my investors had a handshake deal with me. I didn't even have time to paper it. So I was putting my own money out on trust. And you know what? The whole thing collapsed. I woke up one morning and I had shingles. You know what shingles are?
Roof shingles?
No.
Oh,
In French, it's la zona. It's platelets.
yeah.
Platelets, like des écailles, like scales on you. And I went to go see it. I said, I went to go see a doctor. I said, what's this? And he said,
Are you experiencing stress right now?
people at 30 years old don't get that. He said, people at 60 and 70 get that. He said, people don't get that at your age unless they're extremely stressed. What's going on? And I dropped everything. Dropped the building, dropped the financing, dropped the money. I was very lucky. I was very lucky because the investors actually stepped in and paid me back. They didn't have to, but they paid me back. It was very, very special of them. And I fell over there, but that's because the universe needed to teach me a lesson. And anytime, at the time, it wasn't fun at all.
Mm-hmm.
But in retrospect, I learned just how much you need to prioritize your own mental and physical health over any business outcome. And that's a lesson that I learned.
So until you finished your degree, seems like you didn't really had a purpose yet, right? You were exploring, you were learning a lot through books, life. When did you feel like you have a purpose in business for the first time?
It took me a long time actually to feel like I had a purpose in business. To be totally honest with you, maybe my first 8 years in business, my purpose was to make money. You know, it was purely profit. Like, can I turn a good profit and have a strong return on this with a minimal amount of stress or risk? And there was no more rhyme or reason to that, to be honest with you. It was only when I started doing development and I started building a larger team that the purpose came into focus a little bit. Because once I started to build a team, I realized that more than doing real estate development, what I really enjoyed doing was coaching my employees, advising my employees, giving them tools, giving them resources. I think one of the best lessons I learned is that management is not something you do to someone, it's something you do for someone.
And it
And
kind of happened in parallel from when you became a father.
it's a good point. Everything came at once, as life normally does, right? It all came in a tsunami, and that put things into sharp relief. And I said, you know what? More than just purchase asset at low price, sell at higher price, like a caveman kind of equation, I said, I really want to do interesting, impactful projects with people I like and admire. And that's the purpose. I think the purpose transitioned from, profit to a process, right? Like I always say, like the purpose can't be a goal because you spend 1% of your time at the goal and 99% of your time getting there. So the purpose better be somehow aligned at 99%. And the 99% is about really growing together as a team, learning about yourself, learning about other people, helping them grow, growing yourself. That was really more when I started to feel like, okay, I'm aligned. Now my planets are aligning. And that came that came into sharp focus when I decided to exit my company about, say 9 months ago now, because I said to myself, that's really where I want to focus. I want to focus much more full time on coaching, on developing people, on raising people up.
So you kind of learned your craft for 8 years without having a clear purpose. You were still looking for it, I guess. Would you say that learning your craft kind of hid your purpose from you because you were so focused on just being good at being a real estate investor and not focusing on your purpose? Or you were just still looking for it?
I think that I wasn't looking for it that much. I think you can be, right? The curse of success can often be that you're very distracted from what's happening inside, right? You're very externally focused. When interest rates were low and I was able to roll over projects and things were happening successfully, you tend not to be very introspective. So it was only when, the music slowed down or stopped playing, when interest rates went down, or probably, when COVID happened, that there was a bit of a quiet. And sometimes it takes an external quiet to precipitate an internal quiet. So maybe that answers why I wasn't really searching for my purpose. I was too busy just doing.
I think probably a lot of entrepreneurs will go through that, where they learn their craft, and then using that craft, they can actually achieve their purpose. And they find a way of matching those two, because a purpose without a craft is actually hard to follow. But once you've successfully mastered your craft, and I think you did, you have lots of experience in it. You certainly have still stuff to learn, I'm sure, but you're great at generating profits. Now you can use that to good use and teach others.
I think I see that a lot in my entrepreneur group and people I speak to. We call it a second mountain problem. I don't know if you've ever heard that
Nope.
term. We call it a second mountain problem. So the idea is that a lot of my entrepreneur peers feel the same way. They've spent the first 10 to 15 years climbing the first mountain. They were climbing. They're huffing, they're puffing. You lose some people on the way. You don't have an oxygen canister. You break an ankle, right? Like you finally get to the top of the first mountain and you look around. And it's the first time, it's your first mountain. It's the first time in your life that you look around.
And you feel like you've arrived.
Well, you don't feel like you've arrived because it's the first mountain. So what do you see? You look up and you see, oh, wow, there's a second peak over there. There's a possible second peak over there. Okay, this isn't the top of the mountain. I thought it was the top of the mountain this whole time that I was climbing, but I got to the top and I realized, oh no, this is the first peak in a mountain chain. Wait a minute. Now I have other options. So I do three things. The first is I look back and down. I say, wow, whoa, look how far I came. Look how much time that took. Look who came up here with me. Look who we lost on the way. Man, look at how much stronger I am. Look at these leg muscles I got. Wow, I'm up. So you look back. Second thing is you look around. You're like, there's white space. There's time to think. Look how wide open the vista is. Look at what all the options are. And then you look up and you say, look at all these other peaks I could be climbing. How do I choose which one to go to next? But it's very hard to do that when you're climbing the first mountain. Because when you're halfway up the first mountain, all you can see is the peak of the first mountain. And you think that's the peak. You think once I reach there, I'm planting my flag and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a hammock and, have a margarita. But that's not what happens. So you deal with a lot of those typical first mountain problems with successful entrepreneurs once they've reached that point.
And when we're climbing that first mountain, as entrepreneurs, we tend to feel lost. Like when you were like hanging to a vine and in between vines,
Sure.
or there's lots of moments where you feel
Sure.
lost. And another analogy I like is that you're just, carving a trail through a forest and you can't see where the lake is. You're trying to reach it and you're probably zigzagging and it's hard to actually climb above the trees and see where you're going.
Yeah.
And that's how you feel oftentimes as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that? Any advice?
I dealt with it the exact same way I dealt with it when I was literally climbing a mountain in Peru. So, think back, I don't know, this is before we had kids. Back when my wife and I were dating, not yet engaged, she said, how would you like to go for a 5-day hike in Peru? I said, I don't like hiking that much, but I like you a lot. And I know you like it, and it'll make you happy, and I guess I could keep up. So sure, let's go. It turned out that it was a 5-day hike. It was 25 kilometers per day at altitude.
That's a lot.
So I had to take Diamox tablets. You wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you hike till 7 o'clock at night. And when you're hiking that much, first of all, you could only focus on what's next. You're exhausted. You have a pack. You can take little steps because at altitude, you feel like you smoked a carton of cigarettes. There are no trail markers. It's wide open. You have no idea how much space you have in back of you, how much space you have in front of you, where you're going. You don't know anything. Kind of like climbing the first mountain. But we had a guy with us. A guide named Wimber. I remember his name, Wimber. Wimber was a 5-foot-tall Peruvian local for whom that mountain pass was his
home,
backyard. Every corner, every river, every 500-foot drop, every blade of grass was a milestone and was a point to him. He had seen it before. So, Wimber could tell us, listen, when you go around this bend over here, hug the left side, because if you stand too far to the right, it's a 400-foot straight drop. There's no guidelines. You're in the Andes. He said it's a 400-foot straight drop. So, first of all, Wimber's been there before. When Wimber tells you there's a drop, you don't really test. Do I really need to do it? You say, no, I trust this person. He's been there and he knows what could happen. So I'm going to keep an eye out. And the same happens in business. I always sought out mentors. I always sought out people who knew the terrain like their backyard so that they could point out, right? Oh, you think that's like a fuzzy little, you think that animal over there is a fuzzy little, like a rabbit? You want to go pet it? It's poisonous. Don't touch that. You think that that's the shorter route? Actually, you're going to find when you get there, there's a river you can't pass, right? And there's a ton of merit to people who have been there and back, right? Like the Buddha says, like the person who went on the journey is not going to take you and carry you on their shoulders to take you over there, but they can certainly point out the way. And I've been very blessed. I've sought out mentors. I've been blessed to have them, and that's been the biggest difference.
How do you sort out the mentors? Like, how do you approach a mentor?
Well, the first thing you don't do is use the word mentor, because nobody likes that word.
Okay.
It's loaded. It's awkward. People don't know how to respond to it. I think the best advice I ever got was, if you see somebody who you admire or you feel you can learn from who's successful, seek them out and ask them for some of their time. And most successful people, if you are earnest and you're sincere in reaching out to them, they'll give you the time of day. In my experience, 80% of the time, they'll give you the time of day if you're sincere. and speak to them, ask them for advice, and here's the place where you distinguish yourself. This is how you make a mentor. Listen to what they've said, and then go do the thing. Put something they told you into practice, and then follow up with them a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, doesn't matter later, and say, hey, you know what, Leo? 3 months ago, we met, and you told me that I should really focus on, reaching out to people and building an email list with my top clients, and I should really take them out to dinner and create a special event for them. Well, I did it. This is what happened. This was the result. This is the impact it had on my business. Thank you. Point à la ligne. Stop. Don't ask for anything. Don't say anything. But then, a little bit of time after that, ask to meet them again. And you can be damn sure they're going to be happy because they're going to say to themselves, this guy's not wasting my time. Think to yourself.
And my advice works.
And my advice works. It's a self-perpetuating and self-reinforcing virtuous cycle. Mm-hmm. And when you do that a few times, that person becomes a mentor. That's what it is.
I love that. I love talking about mentors. I think they have such a huge impact on somebody's trajectory. And it's an art to surround yourself with mentors.
It is an art.
There's no books on that. It's like you need to kind of figure it out yourself. Or
I think just one more thing I'll say on that is a lot of people make a mistake, and I learned this in relationships. I learned this especially like as a husband. But a lot of people think with a mentor that's about give and take. I like to use the word give and receive. It's very different. You're not there to take from somebody. When they give, you open up and receive and hold it. A glass doesn't take water. A glass receives water. It holds it, right? It molds it to its own shape. And so it's much more dynamic. So it's not just about taking something and holding it. And then the second part is that I just actually joined a program to be a mentor, and I can speak to you about that a bit later. But all of the previous mentors in that program I spoke to, they said, I learned a lot from those younger people. I learned a lot from them. And it's a two-way street.
And would you also speak to peers and peer groups and how it shaped your trajectory?
Sure. I mean, so most people don't know what a peer group is. So I'll maybe start by talking just about what that is. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's a group of people that are at a similar life stage or a similar business stage than you are at, right? People who are around the same level as you in their career paths. So I started early on, maybe going back like 15 years now, maybe more, with something called PBL, like Power Business Lunch, something I started a long time ago. We were 10 entrepreneurs with young companies, all of us looking for clients, all of us really bootstrapping, all of us just trying to figure out what was next. At that point, like I don't think any of us had kids. I don't think any of us had families. None of us were married. It was like a lot younger. But we got to sit down and explore our issues and explore our topics and where we're at. And we all graduated and built businesses, and further on, we all decided, we disbanded, and I searched for another peer group. And about 5 years ago, I was at a different stage in my career. I had built a business that was relatively successful. I wasn't really looking for, say, more clients or more investors. Or let's say I was, but I didn't need to know that information to build my business. And I joined something called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. And that is the peer group that has been most near and dear to my heart. So it's about, I don't know how many members there are worldwide, 10,000, 20,000. It could be a lot. We're about 150 in Montreal. And
150?
150 entrepreneurs in Montreal. I believe the criteria is something like you have to have a minimum of $2.5 million of revenue, and you have to be the controlling shareholder of your company. And I think the average revenue is probably around $10 million across the company. I think it's about the average revenue across people's companies. So we're 150 members, but we meet in what's called a forum of 8. And the rules of that forum are pretty interesting. For starters, we're not allowed to do any business with one another. We can have no interests in common. So if you and I have the same major investor, we can't be in a forum together. Because the whole principle is that when you sit together with those 8 people, it's full open kimono. You need to be able to talk about anything. And I think one of the most powerful parts of it is we call it the 5%. We say that 90% of anything that's going on in my life, I could talk to anybody about. Talk to my friends, my wife, my parents. I could talk to my business partners, my employees. The top 5% best wins and greatest things happening personally, professionally, in your family. And the bottom 5 biggest challenges, very hard to find people you can talk to about that.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you an example, a bottom 5% for some people might be our company has brought on 30 new employees and our revenues are growing, but I still am afraid that I cannot make payroll and I don't know how to tell my employees that I might not be able to make payroll this month. And they're counting on me to pay their rent and to put food on their table. Who else can empathize with that? Who else has had that problem before and can say, oh yeah, so here's how I lived this and here's what I did. Here's how I lived this and here's what I did. You know what? I know somebody who can help you with that. Who else can do that? At the same time, let's say, this is a good example. I know somebody you've been working 80 hours a week for the last 6 years. You've been flying to Asia. You're in the US, you have nonstop. And you know what you said to yourself? For the first time, I just took a fat dividend out of my company. And you know what? I'm building my dream house. I'm going to build my dream house. It's going to cost X dollars. I'm finally doing it. Who else is going to give you a high five? Who's really going to celebrate that?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? This is a car I always wanted. I spoke to a guy.
Really understand.
I was having a meeting with a guy yesterday. I said, what's the first thing you did at your exit? He said, I bought the 1968 Corvette that I wanted when I was a kid. Nice. Who else is going to give you a high five for that? Very few people. So a peer group has a lot of, a ton of power. I tell people, I'm like, they're not your parents, they're not your friends, they're not your family, and they're not your coworkers. They're a different beast. And because of that, and because of the nature and the environment, they could tell you things that nobody else could tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And coming back to the idea of being receptive, you're ready to receive it. Once a year, we do a 5-day retreat, me and my group. We go away somewhere for 5 nights, maybe 6 days. And this year in February, we were in Costa Rica together. And we did a very special exercise. We did a round table and everybody went around and said, for Randall, for instance, Randall, what do I believe is your X-Man ability? What do I think you're very, very top at that I admire, that I would like to have for myself? And what do I think is the biggest barrier that you have that's stopping you from leveling up? And to have 7 people look at me and tell me what they think my biggest barrier is takes a very low ego to say, thank you. But I know in that environment, because it's such a psychologically safe environment,
it's easier to lower your ego.
My guard is so down, it's only said with love, that all I could say is, thank you. And it mijotes for real. You really think about it.
Receive it.
To come back. You're an open vessel, right? You say, okay, I'm ready to receive something that might bruise my ego a little bit.
So peers, mentors, these are 2 major elements that are required to carry you through that hill that you're climbing, that first hill for sure. And it played a big role in mine as well. I'm not done climbing my first mountain. I think there's a third source that feeds you a lot during that time, and it's learning more concretely about your trade, staying informed, reading. is there anything that you'd say like helped you the most in terms of more knowledge-based source?
So I always make a distinction between when you talk about knowledge, right? Let's talk about two kinds of knowledge. And let's talk about real estate because, you're in real estate and I'm in real estate. You do investment, I do investment. So we could talk about that a little bit more specifically. And there are basically two kinds of knowledge. One is specific market tactical knowledge, right? Understanding what the cap rate environment is, understanding the bond yield and where the curve is going, understanding the regulatory environment and where what the direction is, the political environment. That's the technical knowledge of your trade, and that's important. At the same time, I think it's less important than overall principles. Like, ask yourself, why is it that some people are so successful across so many industries, right? I mean, like the first person that comes to mind is Richard Branson, because you're like, who starts like a magazine and an airline and Galactic and like,
Elon Musk,
right? Yeah, or Elon Musk. Like you think they come
business principles.
They come to mind because even Jack Welch at GE, right? General Electric ran everything from like financing companies to hydroelectric turbines and to appliances.
Or the Japanese big...
Yeah, like a Yamaha, for instance, right? You want to buy like a jet ski or you want to buy a piano? We'll put Yamaha to the side because Yamaha has a special conglomerate notion to it. But the idea is fundamental principles are so much more important. So I think it's much more important to understand, like, say, cognitive biases, to understand basic principles and scaffolding and frameworks. So, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but let's talk about a simple one that most people know. Let's talk about like the Pareto principle. This idea that 80% of your results will come from 20% of your efforts. Well, if you know that and you're going to any industry, you're going to be searching for that 20%. You're going to be sifting down. If you're presented with like a ton of information about an industry, you're like, okay, irrelevant, or not even irrelevant, but this is not moving the needle. So in real estate, for instance, people could talk to you about all kinds of gobbledygook, but you're like, say rent, cap rate, construction costs are probably the three levers that are going to influence 80, if not 90% of your return. So yes, you could learn about HVAC and you could learn about structural engineering and you could learn about, CMHC policy, but spend time really understanding those three and you could be wrong about all the other ones and you'll be successful. So
Pareto principle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like biases, like thinking fast and slow, like did you learn this from books mostly and feels like this is a good place to start, or anywhere else?
I think it's really hard to learn cognitive biases unless you're learning it from somebody else. By nature, they're kind of invisible to you. And I think you brought up Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman's book. And one of the most fascinating lessons that you learn from Daniel Kahneman, he won the Nobel Prize for this, is that even after you learn about cognitive biases, you're still subject to them.
Yeah.
There's a great one called the planning fallacy. And the planning fallacy states that every project will take more time to complete and cost more to complete than originally planned, even when taking into account the planning fallacy. The second part is the most important. It's that it's so hard to get away from them. It doesn't mean you should give up, and it doesn't mean to disregard them, but it means that, you're a human.
Yeah.
And you have to understand what your biases are. But better to know.
Putting words on things, on concepts, helps you use them. Like you can't use something you don't have a word for, and so I think knowing about biases, sunk cost fallacies, and understanding your own way of thinking, and
of course,
everything psychology also probably fits in. Like there's lots of,
especially as an investor,
emotional intelligence, and
you're so, as an investor, you're so subject to those biases, and you need to be so careful because that's what could really hurt you. Just thinking off the top of my head, availability bias. Availability bias says people tend to choose among the most available options to them at that time. So if you're looking at your company, you might have deal flow from one or two sources. And you might be so busy with those one or two sources because your availability bias says that's where my attention goes. But if you say to yourself, you're like, wait a minute, there are 8 dormant sources right now. Maybe I'm not sourcing the best investments, right? Maybe I should look elsewhere. That knowledge about the bias starts to influence your behavior.
So how did you learn about these biases?
I think the first time, for me at least, something that's really fascinating. I'm personally very interested in learning more about myself. And I think anytime I learn about something about myself, like I dig deeper in. I've always been a highly introspective person.
Mm-hmm.
You ever hear about the Johari window? Okay, we're going to park that for a second. And I'm going to say that when it comes to a cognitive bias, when you read about something that affects you and you're like, oh man, I've been making this mistake. I've been making this mistake my whole life. You're like, oh, there's a name for that. Wow. What else can I learn about myself? So there's one called the Parkinson principle.
Parkinson.
The Parkinson principle, Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law says that the time it takes to complete a task will expand or contract in consequence of the time given for that task. If you're given 6 hours to write an essay, you'll write it in 6. If you're given 3, you'll write it in 3, right? And you're like, oh, that's a cognitive bias.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something I can engineer. And I've always been interested, and this comes back to like mentors, peer groups, to your question, in expanding what's called the Johari window. So it's hard to explain in a, if I had a whiteboard, this would be a different kind of podcast maybe. Next time I'll have a whiteboard here so I could jot stuff out. But think of 4 quadrants. One is the things I know about me that you know about me.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I call my public face. I know about me and you know about me. Then there's the elements that you know about me that I don't know about me. We call those like the green tails. I might have a green tail behind me. You can see it. Other people can see it, but I can't see it. Everybody has those, right? Those are my blind spots. Then I have the things that I know about myself that you don't know about me. Those are like my secrets. Those are things that I progressively reveal. And then there's the last box, which is the most fascinating. It's things I don't know about me that you also don't know about me. This is the part of shared discovery. By us getting together and having, discussions, building relationships, we each learn things about ourselves that neither of us knew about ourselves. And in peer groups, in good mentor relationships, you're both expanding that. Both parties, the mentor also, right? And that's part of the reason that we do our trips is because by taking yourself out into very different contexts, you learn things about yourself. The same way I learned a lot about my wife and I learn a lot about one another spending 5 days in the Andes. We both discovered things about ourselves that we didn't know about ourselves. And the same thing, in February, our group went deep sea fishing. Almost none of us had ever done that. None of us knew what it entailed. None of us knew like the work you need to go through to catch like 120-pound marlin, right? And so you see people in a different context, or you stress test them and you learn something about yourself. So I think that's coming back to this idea of the cognitive biases. Every time you look at it, it opens up that part of the Johari window.
Okay, so if I come back to these 2 major knowledge categories that
Sure.
you were mentioning, there's the trade secrets or the trades metrics, or your craft, basically.
Yeah, your craft.
And the other part is not, when you were talking about principles, you're not talking about business principles here. You're talking about, let's call them psychology principles. And that's what's behind economy, right? When you're learning about economy in university, that what you're learning about is the way people think, their biases. That's the way people behave. That comes back to psychology, and understanding how you think helps you understand how other people think, and thinking a lot about that and spending time talking about it with mentors and peers, and in contexts where you actually go more in an introspective
Yeah.
manner into those conversations will teach you a lot of stuff that will eventually help you in your business.
Yeah. Well, you bring up what you learn in school, and it's funny because it wasn't taught in school. What was taught in school and universities was economics. It was taught that economics was the backbone discipline of understanding the world. Daniel Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky and Richard Thaler all got together, and they all won Nobel Prizes because they invented a field. They said, wait a minute. They said economics is not how the world works. They said behavioral economics is how the world works, and they created a field. And that's the real backbone. So when you say they're not business principles,
They are.
I challenge that. I say they are business principles. And like what I tell people, they say there's no such thing as a B2B business. And there's no such thing as a B2C business. There's only one kind of business. P2P. Person to person.
Yeah.
Right?
And business is more superficial, I find, than this whole concept of humankind. And understanding humankind is probably the best way to better yourself as a business person, because you'll just ride the wave that's natural.
It's people talking to people.
Understanding human nature. So up until now, you've been telling us about this journey of climbing this mountain and everything you learned from this on yourself, and you've achieved that first peak, and that must be something to say that about like your entrepreneurial life. I guess you've been lucky to have this opportunity to take that step back in your life and to reassess. You were mentioning the economic context kind of created headwinds that kind of helped you make this decision to step back and look back at what you've been doing and redefine your purpose. So tell us about those discoveries you've made through this achieving this peak and taking a step back.
Yeah, so let me see if I can do this without getting too philosophical about it. But to bring something down more realistically, last year I turned 40, and that was one of the biggest catalysts for this, because for some reason, when I turned 30, it wasn't the same as 40. At 30, I wasn't retrospective. I wasn't thinking forward. But at 40, I really thought about the last 10 years of my life, what I'd done, what I had accomplished, what seemed so important at the time that wasn't, what turned out to be important, what mattered, what gave me energy, what depleted my energy. And I started looking forward 10 years and saying, what do I want that 10 years to look like? And if you're reasonably successful in any career, by 40 years old, you can dial it in. If you're a reasonably successful dentist or doctor or accountant or lawyer or mid-level executive, you can keep on doing it. You'll just keep on ratcheting up. You'll make a bit more money. You'll pay your mortgage. You'll have a good time. You could take vacation. Like, you will have a wonderful, wonderful life. But me being a little bit more introspective, I said to myself, like, I really need to calibrate my compass over here. There's something about having reached that peak and thinking that I need to calibrate now. And I started thinking a lot more about my values. Like, what do I value? What's important? And a good way to think about what you value is something that's important for its own sake. So, for instance, you might say like, I value, like a lot of people are like, I value having like a lot of money. Why? Because it gives me the freedom to do what I want. Well, why is it important to do what I want? Because I want to feel in control of my life. Well, why do I want to feel in control of my life? Because autonomy is like fundamental to my being. Why is autonomy fundamental to my being? I don't know, but it is. So you don't care about money. Your value is autonomy. Once you start going a few why and you hit to the bottom of the well of the why, that's when you're like, okay, there's nothing left to scratch. C'est la moelle, it's the marrow. That's your value. So you get to 4 or 5 of those, say they're, autonomy. They might be,
A value is something that stands on its own.
it stands on its own. A value might be autonomy. Like I know you pretty well, and I know that for you, a value that stands on its own is aesthetic beauty, right? Aesthetics, it's a value for you that if you scratch any further, there's nothing there. It's in your marrow, right? I know, like, you're an artist. I know
I get what you mean. It's not for something else.
it's not for something.
like
It's an end in itself. When you see a beautiful piece of architecture, it feels complete and satisfactory on its own terms, right? And so once you clarify those, I liken it to like polarizing your compass. I was talking to some students about this yesterday in another context that I'm doing, and I said, what happens when you don't have a polarized compass? They didn't know. I guess they never saw a compass before, but you're a bit of a woodsman, so maybe you've seen a compass in your life. It spins, right? It spins around if it's not polarized, if it's not pointing to true north. But once you have those, you have a compass that points to true north. Great. And that was what happened. That's what I started to not just realize I had a compass, but there are two things. So you have a compass that points to true north. Then you have to decide to use it to guide you, right? You have to say, okay, I'm going to follow where it goes because it's pointing me in the right direction. Fuck, it might not be a pleasure to go there. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
Cool. It might not look good. That man, West looks so much easier, right? It's full of like lily pads and like dewy meadows, but this true north, there's a mountain, there's a tiger over there. There.
Do you have a concrete example of a choice you've made that felt right but more difficult?
Oh yeah.
So we can picture what you're saying.
Not long after I exited my business, I had the chance to join an equity firm, like a firm doing private equity. Okay, I knew the partner. We got along really well. I liked him. We could have coffees. We could jazz. We could get together. It was already rolling for about 3 years, that company. He was ready to take me on as a full partner because he wanted to grow with me. I knew how to run it. It would have been very lucrative. And I said to myself, I'm like, you know what? I took the words of Seth Godin. I said, I can't work with you until I work with you. So I said, let's do a project together. And as I'm doing the project together, I noticed a clash in values, right? So one of my core values is pursue deep, mutually generous relationships. That's one of my core values because there's nothing behind that. That is a good in itself. But that person, because of maybe like a trauma he had or because of his personality, I noticed that he was very, very tight. He kept things very, very, very like to himself. So what that meant is, if certain employees want benefits, he would pull them back. He would chisel certain suppliers or chisel certain employees, right? And I saw that there's a clash in our values. So I have a choice. I can say, now that I have my compass, I know that's my value. I can't lie to myself. I could say, you know what? I could paper over that. I can get over that. It's not going to bother me. It's really lucrative. I could be really successful doing that. But I said no. I said, I like you. I'm happy to hang out with you anytime. I'm happy to have coffee with you. But this is not for me. And I walked away from it because, there were other times in my life when I papered over things like that. And all it is like it's, for lack of a better term, it's like a cancer.
A rock in your shoe.
It just grows. Yeah, it grows. It grows.
It grows.
It grows. Yeah. It grows because, especially in a business relationship, kind of like in a marriage or anything else, if there's a fundamental disagreement, as the stakes get higher, As the business grows, as decisions get more complex, as you have children, as you have to make real important decisions about somebody else's life and something consequential together, you'll find that you cannot decide. Cannot decide. Why can't you decide? There's a mismatch of values. And the contrary is also true. When your values are the same, you disagree. And it's fun to disagree. But you're not disagreeing about whether you're going north. You're disagreeing about, should we go over? Should we go under? How should we get there? Right? So I've used it very much because I say, these are my values and I've listed them, I've written them down, and they're prescriptive. I can look at any person or any situation and say, does this put me in a situation to be with, say, to pursue deep, mutually generous relationships with people or not? Right? Another one is think methodically, act kindly. That's a core value of mine. Am I in an environment where people act like that? I want to be in an environment where people think in a structured way, in a methodical way. I can't handle people who are just like, I feel it because I feel it. And there are people who are like that. Mm-hmm. They go by their feeling and their gut, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if I'm trying to make a decision on a very, very important, business decision, and I have reasons A, B, C, and they inexorably lead to D, conclusion, and someone's like, but I still feel like it should be F because it's my feeling. And there are people like that. We're never going to get along. So you always look at your values and you measure them against others, and you say, okay, well, you're not my cup of tea.
So taking the time to introspect, to be introspective about the past 10 years allowed you to define your values better.
Yeah, taking the time to really, really think about it, really, really write them down, really look at, one simple way to do it is when I used to do one-on-ones with my employees, I would ask them my favorite question. I would say, looking back on the last week, what gave you energy and what depleted your energy? And very often, if you do that often enough, you'll start to see patterns emerge. Mm-hmm. And the patterns of what don't give you energy or deplete your energy, those are what I'll call your anti-values. And what gives you energy, there's something related to your values. And the best analogy I use is I say, you could be in a meeting that's 20 minutes and you leave with the energy sucked out of you. You're just zonked. You're done for the day. And conversely, you could be in a 3-hour meeting where you come out feeling like you're the king of the world, you're the Incredible Hulk, right? You're just energized. Mm-hmm. So it's not about time. It's not even about effort. It's about the energy exchange. Yeah. And, what I tell people is another good way to think about your values is what causes you to seize up. So look at your anti-values, right?
Yeah, you've mentioned that last time we met. I think that's a great way to help with finding your values. I myself and other people around me, I notice when they start going through that process of peeling the layers and trying to understand yourself better, we get from years and years of callousing our mind, can't feel much what's inside. What's that compass is not the strength of the direction is not very strong. You kind of over time become desensitized and only think with your head and less with your spirit or with your heart. And so you don't hear those values much. They're kind of buried. And there's this these layers stopping the sound, But this anti-value test seems a whole lot easier to hear.
Well, it is because
it's easier to see what you're.
Even when you speak to most people about anything, you ask people, what do you want to do for work? What career do you want? They say, I don't know, but I know what I don't want to do. Right? A lot of people can point that out a lot better, what they don't want than what they do want. So if that's where somebody's going to start their journey, okay, we'll
and
start
the more
over there.
you do that kind of work, it gets louder and clearer what you want and what you don't want. And you've done the effort and you've done it all your life, but reducing all the noise around you
So-
made things clearer also.
So I think that that's the big analogy. And, we've both done Vipassana meditation. So we both know what it's like when you can only see the stars on a black night, right? They're always there, but you can only see them on a black night. And the same way, your true self, it whispers. It whispers to you. But there's so much noise, like so much noise. And I think about social media. I think about, YouTube. I think about TikTok. I think about the news. I think about popular books. I think about most of it. A lot of it is saying the same thing. And the analogy I use is, instead of follow the leader, people are engaged in what I call follow the follower. It's like a never-ending circular, like a circular journey where if you follow the follower, you're going in a circle. No one's going anywhere. You get this advice, so you retweet this advice, so you pull that advice out, so you do a riff on that advice, and then it all becomes it becomes, first of all, directionless, and it becomes a monoculture. So in order to hear that voice, what you have to do is you have to start like reading and listening and thinking to people who are very far outside of that, who are independent thinkers. You have to seek out independent thinkers. And anytime you seek out an independent thinker, one of the ways that you can kind of judge it is when you read something they write or you hear something they say, it resonates on a frequency with you. You're like, oh, that's a true truth. Like that feels that feels.
Naval Ravikant, you know him,
Yes.
was saying that he started reading only the sources, the original sources of everything of that repeat and follow the follower new book thing, where people are kind of repeating and refashioning, like OG concepts.
Ryan Holiday made a whole career out of redigesting Marcus Aurelius, right? And Epictetus. Like those were both Seneca.
And Naval was saying, like, I try not to read anymore what's came after the original source. So it was like, an example was like, read Darwin, read on the origin of species. Like it's a small book, and it created everything else afterward. But that's like an example of an original source.
Yeah. So
or the Bhagavad Gita, like stuff like that.
When you read the Bhagavad Gita, like there are like incredible, incredible lessons. And that's part of the reason that I studied the Western canon, is like I spent 3 years reading the original source material, right? You think of the like advice of the Bhagavad Gita, like he doesn't talk about, mental health. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't talk about work-life balance, but it says, plunge headlong into the heart of battle while keeping your feet at the base of the lotus. It doesn't talk about work-life balance, but it's telling you something important, that you can be what's called a warrior philosopher. The two exist, right? You're not a painter or a businessman. I mean, you're a painter and a businessman, right? So, and I think you bring up something interesting, which is like the noise. I find signal and noise is very important, and creating moments for clarity forget about like as a boss or a business owner or anything, like it is important. And
that's why I'm saying somehow you're lucky that this moment happened in your life. Like things, you could have been in the middle of the most successful streak of your life and your business, and like it happened to you in the past years, you might have not taken that break.
Yeah, might have missed it. Yeah.
And somehow stars aligned and you took that break.
Yeah.
It matched with turning 40. And so you took that break, and it allowed you to remove the noise and get the signal.
Yeah. But as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking that, it'd be interesting. You know what a bivouac is?
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't, I guess.
Lean-to, right?
You need to, yeah.
A lean-to.
A lean-to, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're climbing, especially when you're climbing something really steep, if you're on a multi-day climb, you set up a bivouac, and you could set it up kind of, let's say, even suspended off the
edge.
off the rock face. And I think it's really important for people to not wait till they get to the top of the mountain, right? Bivouac. Like, put your peg in the wall, set up a canopy, and sit and look out at the vista. Look down at how far you came. Appreciate how far you came. Look up, and then just look at nothing. Look at the vista. Just let your mind be empty for a second. And I think,
how do you do that?
I forgot
Retreats.
to do that.
Like,
How do you do that? I think the two words that come to mind for some reason are act like an analog tortoise. This is the best. This is the spirit animal to go with right now. First of all, take anything digital out. Act in an analog method, and act like a tortoise. A tortoise slows its pace down. It's not rushed. It's self-contained. It has everything it needs within itself, right? Whether that's a retreat, whether that's taking the morning and going for a walk in the woods, whether that's like sitting in your living room, like with tea and a pencil, just like we talked about, removing the noise so you could hear
periodically removing noise.
Yeah. It could be a bath. Just let things come to the surface. It's not for nothing that most people have their ideas in the shower. It's almost, for a lot of people, like the last place.
Their last shelter.
I think the new iPhone. Yeah, I think the new iPhone is waterproof, and it's a horrible idea. But I think it's one of the last refuges. Like, I think to myself, one of the saddest moments of my life was when I boarded a plane and they said, "Oh, there's now free Wi-Fi on board." I said, that was the last cylinder of peace available. I was in a Pringle can of Zen flying in the sky, and you broke
that from me.
you took that from me. It used to be you got on a plane and you said, "Well, nothing I can do now. And one thing that also happened in the last year is I became like a lot closer to religion. I became a lot closer to my Jewish roots. Like, I started practicing a lot more. And one thing that you do is you observe the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, you don't use electronics. You don't transact. You don't purchase. You don't give gifts. What do? You spend time with your family. You eat. You go for walks. You could pray. You can go to synagogue. It's community. And, on a fundamental level, what are you doing? Is like you're observing. You're looking around, right? I think the most fundamental lesson that I teach people about the Sabbath is, if you want to take the religion part out of it, and you can just talk about something really, really real, say that 6 days of the week, everything we do is to bend the world to our will. We're fashioning things to our will. We're purchasing things to acquire them, to make ourselves more comfortable or more complete, or to make things more efficient. We're acquiring. We're putting in systems and places. We're building roads and bridges to try to cross. And one day a week, we look around and we say, you know what? Everything is actually perfect as it is. The world turns on its axis without me. Let me not get so absorbed in the illusion that I am the guiding force that spins the world around. And I think that's
letting go of control, letting things be, being part of the
letting go. I think letting go is the master skill of life. Absolutely. And letting go of control is interesting.
But that warrior philosopher, the warrior part is not letting go.
So there's a very interesting have you ever seen Band of Brothers? Band of Brothers was a mini series about World War II soldiers in the Pacific Theater.
Yeah, no, I didn't see that.
World War II? Yeah, World War II. And there's one captain of the regiment who keeps on being the first person to go over the line, the first person to like enter a new village, the first person any battle out there. And at one point it's coming up and they're saying, well, like, aren't you afraid? How could you do it? Aren't you afraid? And he said, when I arrived on the shores over here, he said, I accepted that I'm already dead. I'm already dead. And so he was the most successful warrior and he made it out alive
By letting go.
by letting go. He let go. And he didn't let go. And letting go is a form of wisdom and a form of honesty because, man, we don't control everything. We don't even control anything. I think back to my business career. I was having this discussion with somebody the other day about how there are so many times where I did so many things wrong on transactions, and yet macroeconomics were in my favor, and my mistakes were swept under the rug. And on the rising tide of macroeconomics, my boat just came into harbor. And there was a transaction I'm thinking about in particular where I held this building for 2.5 years, and I should have made a very, very good profit. And I was, I can toot my own horn. I was a tactical genius on this thing. I did everything right. I should write a book about it, and it was a perfect investment. And I lost money on it. I lost money because every single thing moved against me. Even to cite one example, even the CMHC had a policy that was 100% against me for the 2 years of my hold period. And a month before I closed, they removed the policy. They removed the restriction. So just to tell you that, like, I don't have any illusions. I don't control anything. Thinking we control, we don't, is a huge source of stress. We influence, we affect, but we don't control. I think one of my favorite analogies, and one thing that really helped me let go of that, was this idea of the archer. This idea that when you're an archer, what do?
Prepare.
You prepare, you focus, you aim, you could choose your target, you could sight it, you could choose your tension, and you shoot your arrow. But as soon as you open and let go of your arrow,
you release.
You
the
release.
Arrow. You don't throw the arrow.
You have absolutely no control about the outcome of that arrow. A bird could fly in the middle, a gust of wind could take it away, the target could fall down, anything could happen. So you control your actions. You don't control any of your outcomes. Any of your outcomes, right? Somebody tried to assassinate Donald Trump. He didn't control the outcome. He had no control over the outcome. He had control over one thing. Do you pull the trigger or not? But after you pulled that trigger, something else had to control that outcome. Whatever you want to call it. You can call it God, you can call it universe, you can call it dumb luck. But to think you have control is an illusion in any case. I don't know if we got off tangent over here.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Making all of these, having all of these thoughts, brought you to make a decision on the next peak you were going to climb, and select a path.
Yeah.
That was more aligned with who you are. Coming back to your parents, picking a path that actually fit them better, and things comes full circle. And now I think you've picked a path that really suits you. So do you want to talk about where you're at now?
Sure. Well, there's a great line from Bob Dylan, who had many, many great lines. He said, you got to serve somebody. And, a life of service and choosing who the people are that you want to care for and help and elevate and work with is important. And because I've always been a lifelong learner and somebody who loves growth and learning and development, I've really decided to align myself with people like that. And so I'm spending full time now coaching people, coaching companies, but specifically coaching entrepreneurial driven companies, CEOs, the leadership team, and also running a peer group for ultra high net worth individuals. So again, serving a group of people who most people would not think of as in need. But everybody needs to be with their own type of people. So right now, I chair a group of ultra high net worth individuals who get together once per month in a hyper confidential environment. We obviously don't even talk about where we are or who the members are, to talk again about like that top 5% and that bottom.
That's Tiger 21.
Yeah, exactly. A top 5%.
Another international organization like EO.
Another international organization. The three biggest ones, well-known ones, are EO for entrepreneurs, YPO for young executives, and Tiger 21, which is mostly for people who have exited or accumulated a significant amount of wealth and are elevated outside the operations of their company. So these are people who, by and large, are not operating companies anymore.
Climbing the second peak.
They might be climbing a third or a fourth peak, or very often they're at the top of Everest, to be honest with you. That's really it. These are people who have really reached like Everest, and it's very concerning, because you can imagine when you reach Everest and if you look down and every other peak is lower than you, you're a little concerned. Where do you go from here? You come back down, and who do you want to talk to? You don't want to talk to somebody who never left base camp. You only want to talk to other people who've been to the peak. And so we're able to get together and share not only what's happening in our world, but people do something in this group that's unique to the world. They open once per session, one member will open their portfolio, their entire portfolio. These are extremely private people. These are people who have significant wealth, for whom sometimes their children, sometimes even their spouse doesn't know.
What kind of wealth?
Well, the minimum capital requirement is $20 million US in investable assets. But I would say
liquid assets.
In liquid assets. But I would say the average across the table is probably closer to about 100 or 150 million. Yeah. So these, in general, other than to their financial advisors or perhaps to their accountants, and even to them, they don't open up their entire allocation. So you open up the entire kimono to this group. They see every dollar you have, where it is, where it's going, what's your plan, what's your succession plan. And when you're able to build an environment of vulnerability and psychological safety, you're able to help people, expand their Johari window. You help people build relationships. You help them grow personally, grow emotionally, because everybody has challenges.
And again, that Johari window, that's the fourth one of what I don't know and other people don't know about me, right? Or it's the four quadrants.
All of them. There might be what I know about myself that you don't know about me. I might know things that I keep to my chest. But in a group of people who, I like to use the phrase ultra high net worth, ultra low ego, because having the capital is not enough to come in to the table. You have to have a very low ego, open to vulnerability, contributor, learner mindset. So we call the capital table stakes, and not everybody, will play nice at the table, and they're not invited to the table. So it also allows you in certain environments to talk about things that you really would like to get it out. You really would like to speak
just like
about it.
What you were mentioning about EO.
Yeah.
And it's, may you be at the Everest or at base camp, like it's always something you need. And
sure. Like let's talk about the two, if you are deciding whether you should buy or lease a jet this year, who's going to celebrate that with you? Who's going to have that conversation with you? Who cares? Just because you have $100 or $200 million doesn't mean the friend you grew up with does. They're still your friends. You love your friends. You play cards with your friends. You have beer with your friends. But, you also can't have that discussion with them, because they're going to be like, well, it must be nice. It's not really an issue. Or the bottom 5%, which, one member, they said, I got on a flight with my 10-year-old daughter, and she said, Daddy, why are these people on our plane? And I realized it was the first time that she had ever flown commercial in her life. What do I do? So how, again, must be nice. People pat you on the back, say that's not a real problem. But here's somebody who not probably, but these are all Gen 1. Everybody here grew up under normal circumstances, built their businesses mostly from scratch, right? They're not entitled. They worked 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. They probably gave like, a piece of their organ to this business, and now they have children. And how do you decide? Well, I want to help my children, pave the way for my children, but I don't want to like pave it so much that it's frictionless for them, right? I could, but what kind of life will it be if it's frictionless? Their muscles, their legs will atrophy if they're not climbing that mountain. I could flatten that mountain for them any
You
day.
can't grow without friction. It's essential.
Yeah.
Nice.
could
And
remove-
what's your like?
yeah.
What's you've been named chair of the Montreal.
Yes. Yeah. There are two groups in Montreal right now. But because there's a restricted amount of people at the table and it's a closed group, once it's subscribed, they open a second. So there are two groups now, and I'm opening the third. Yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you.
That's amazing. I didn't get to
Thank you.
celebrate that with you. And
Is there champagne somewhere behind you?
sure we can find some
No? Okay. Okay. Next time.
in the fridge.
No problem.
What's your value add here? Like, why did you want to take this role, and why do you think what value you think you're bringing to this role? That's unique.
I've seen the power of a peer group, so that's the first reason I've done it. The second is I've met so many people through this organization, and the level of generosity. There are about 1,500 members worldwide, and the level of generosity among them is so incredible that it made me want to be a part of that. Like, we came back to the core values, and everybody I met with just kept ticking those boxes. When one person does, another person does, you say to yourself, wait a minute, this is a culture of my core values. There's people who are generally kind, people who are very methodical, they're structured thinkers, people who care about doing things, in an aesthetic way, the right way, people who are generous. What do I bring to it? I think that my experience is very, very outside the pale of typical business people or entrepreneurs. I know from having a very good representative sample of entrepreneurs across the world, because I speak to people, that I probably spend much more time on spiritual pursuits than most people. And we even did an
taking on the role of the priest.
Taking on the role of the priest. I'm taking on the
Shepherd.
role of the neither the priest, not the rabbi. I'm not the shaman. I'm not the Buddha for sure. I'm taking on the servant leadership role, right? I don't believe so much in prescriptive advice as much as I do in experience sharing and opening the door for people. I think
And setting an example for opening yourself.
Yeah.
And
I've opened a lot of doors, and I think probably my biggest value add is very often when I meet with somebody, I could say to them, you know what? I think you should like open that door and look inside. So I'll give you an example. There was somebody I was coaching, and she wants to know about her next career. Should she be staying in the same place and doubling down, or where should she go, and how should she decide? And I thought about, there's an assessment that I did 12 years ago, 15 years ago. That would be good for you. It's called the Kolbe. Have you ever heard of the Kolbe assessment? Kolbe?
rings a bell, but you might have mentioned it.
I might have mentioned it, sure.
Colby.
So the Kolbe assessment is different than personality assessments because they tell you if you're introverted, extroverted, right? If you're emotional.
Colb.
Kolbe. And
Okay.
those have value. But Kolbe is different because it tells you how you naturally take action. It'll tell you, are you, for instance, a fast start, slow or no follow through person, right? And I was able to help point her out to that tool that could help her understand, well, let's say you're like a really fast start, low follow through person, for instance. Let's say that's one of your, that's one of your methods of working. It's a natural way. Well, then if a company that's doing sales wants to put you in the role of close deals or nurture ongoing relationships, you're going to know, I don't want to be a nurturer. I don't deal well with a slow-mo nurturing relationship. I want quick hits, quick hits, quick hits. It's okay. It's in your nature.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to maybe like the overarching theme of our talk today is it helps people understand, get closer to their
Knowing
nature.
yourself.
And I think part of what I want to help people with is helping them like look around, make sense of what they see when they look around. They might not have a second mountain to climb, but what's so interesting, to come back like to the spiritual element, is like, if you look at the spiritual leaders who climbed the highest mountains, like spiritual, like enlightenment, like the Buddha is the best example. I mean, he reached enlightenment, and what did he do? He didn't reach enlightenment and then go live in a cave and stay there forever. He went right back among the people. And he said, I'm going to just interact with you day to day and just be a light
Socrates style.
unto you. There you go. Right?
Yeah.
Socrates also said, I'm going to sit down at the agora and I'm going to be
ask people questions, like
Yeah.
help them
Yeah.
know themselves, ask themselves the right questions, or ask themselves more questions.
And most people are doing that. They're going towards philanthropy. They're looking for meaning, and not everybody knows where to find it. It's not something that's celebrated in our culture. It's not something that looks good on a 3-second reel. It's not something that's like interesting to talk about when you're sitting on a Lambo, right? It doesn't resonate.
So would you say your renewed purpose is to help people get to know themselves? Would that sum it up, or am I not correct?
I would say it's more about using my own wisdom, my own knowledge, my own experiences to help guide people along their own journeys of growth. I'm not helping somebody because I don't think that people need help. I think that everybody's on their own journey, and what people might need is a guide who may have been in some place before and say, take a look at that, take a look. What do you think about that? It's their own journey.
Mhm.
I don't know where it goes. It'd be presumptuous of me to know where it goes, but more of a guide, and an accompagnant.
And you do that by pointing out opportunities for them, or by asking them the right questions?
I mean, you pointed out by trying to get to know who somebody is. Like, who is Leo? Like, what's driving Leo? What does Leo really want? I think I was working with another coach. I myself have worked with coaches for the last 10 years, and I think
That's another
any good coach
element that we
any good
forgot
coach
to
can
mention.
and does get coached 100%. I mean,
Mentors, peers,
everybody
knowledge,
does,
and coaches.
of course. And one of my favorite questions that one of my coaches asked me is, what do you want? Fuck, that's a difficult question. What do you want? And if you tell him what you want, so, people will say, I want a house here, and I want a secondary house there, and maybe I want a third house, and I want this car, and I want to be able to take a vacation 4 times a week. People will say that.
Why?
No, he'll say an even better question. He'll say, poof, magic wand, you have it now. Now what? And that usually stops most people dead in their tracks. Cool. Now you have it. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, if you had $1 billion right now, what would you do?
He goes, now you
with
have
your
it.
time?
Great. Whatever you say you really want, whatever life you want is you have it. Now what? And I think that's the essence of what I'm doing with people in Tiger is I'm working with people who maybe have gotten that magic wand.
Mm-hmm.
You cashed out, you sold your company for 100 million, 150 million. Okay. Now what? That's tough. So it's less about advice and pointing faults out and more about helping people understand their own nature, helping people ask themselves questions that they never asked of themselves before. And coming back to what we were saying, like, I have mentors, I still have mentors, and man, they ask me tough questions or like stumping questions on a regular basis, right?
So what is the first meeting? Now let's talk about your coaching mandate.
Sure.
What's a first meeting with you looks like?
There's obviously no script, but the first meeting is going to be, I don't charge for the first meeting because I don't know if I want to work with you and you don't know if you want to work with me. And one thing I don't want to do is talk to you about coaching, right? I'm not going to talk to you about chocolate if you've never had chocolate. I'm not going to talk to you about scuba diving if you've never gone down there. What am I going to talk to you? I'm going to take you down and let's go look at some coral. Let's go have a chat. So my first meeting is 2 hours. We need 2 hours because the first hour is going to be, just a warm up. We're going to get something real in the last hour and a half. Something real might come out. And usually we'll go to a place quiet. I like to go to a place in a perfect world, either outside, where it's just, two people. In a perfect world, a place where there's like a long vista, if you can see across water, if you can see across a field. I think people are psychologically more open when they're in a place where they can visually see things are more open. I did one session on a rooftop of a very, very tall building. I got magical access to the rooftop. So we could just sit on 2 lawn chairs and just look so people could see a vista. And I'll usually ask people, say what they're presenting with, why, what got them, how did you get to today, what's top of mind. Nothing crazy, because it doesn't really matter where the conversation starts.
But you're looking for something. You're looking for a fit. Are you looking for humility, like enough humility that you can work with the person?
I'm looking for a bunch of things. The first is I'm always looking for a value fit, right?
Value fit.
The first is if somebody doesn't fit with my core values, it's just not going to work. We're not going to connect.
Do you find that most people you meet with for the first time know their core values?
They don't need to articulate them. And in general, somebody who's looking for coaching has already ticked off boxes. If you're looking for coaching, you've already said, I need help. I'm aware. I'm receptive and ready to listen to somebody. I've carved out the time, right? So many boxes have been already ticked for somebody to sit down with you that usually that's kind of spoken for.
That's already qualified.
Yeah, there's a lot of pre-qualification that happens. But somebody once said that the mark of a great consultant, and I would say this, the mark of a great therapist and the mark of a great doctor and the mark of a lot of great people is you never solve the problem that you were hired to solve, right? People come in with
underlying issue.
An underlying issue, right? You come into a doctor and you say like, I have a headache. And the doctor says, yeah, sure, here's an Advil. Have a nice day. Or the doctor says, well,
do you drink water?
Do you drink water? And you're like, yeah. You're like, okay, tell me about your day. Tell me about tell me about how you grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about, oh yeah, you had an issue with your mom. Oh yeah, okay. You guys have a fraught relationship. Oh, she spoke to you this morning. Interesting. Okay. You don't need an Advil, right? You need some other course of action. So most of the time,
symptoms.
Yeah, most of the time when people come see me, they've taken enough Advil. They've treated the symptoms long enough, and they're ready to go down a little bit further. Sometimes not even consciously, but unconsciously. And to come back to what we talk about, a lot of it will be, I'll burrow, I'll ask uncomfortable questions, and more often than not, I will try not to believe their story. And I think that's the hardest part. We all have a rehearsed story. We tell ourselves a lot, and we tell it to other people. And when somebody doesn't quite believe your story, it opens up a place of hesitation. And that's a place where you start to see a little crack or a little stutter or an eye tick or a fidget or a something. And when you, as soon as in the course of regular conversation, you find the fidget or the tell or the tick or the hesitation or the dry mouth, you say, okay, let's focus on that. Let's not get caught up in your story. Let's talk about that.
That's so cool.
And I would say it's not a special skill other than just unlimited curiosity about another person, right? If you're really curious, anybody can do it.
So you've taken on multiple clients
already?
Yeah,
I have. Yeah, I have a handful of clients. I'm careful about who I take on, obviously. I don't want to pack my schedule full because, first of all, I'm not running this like a puppy mill. That's the first thing. And the second is, as I was saying, I need time to like digest, to think, to let ideas percolate to the surface. And I find by dealing with a limited amount of clients at any given time, what it allows me to do is, on a subconscious level, you start thinking about them. So, Leo, if we meet maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever our frequency is, between those times, something you said percolates and it digests and it ferments. And I say, oh, maybe there's something else there. Oh, wait, I could have asked that. Or you know what? I let that go too easily, right? If you have too many people, you don't think. It's like eating and not digesting. You're just going to be bourré. So there's a natural part of it. The opposite is like if you look at the medical system, doctors just like they flow through. But you want to be able to think about it. And I guess, to be perfectly frank with what I charge, I'm able to do that. So I'm able to deliver that level of insight. So I'm saying, as soon as Leo leaves the room, I don't forget about Leo forever, right? Some of it is still percolating. And that's where the insights come. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's not about like an aha moment. It's more about a progressively aha process.
So you've had examples before. You've had coaches before.
I've had coaches
following
before.
in their steps and the way you're coaching. You've kind of created your own complete model.
I mean, yes and yes. I don't think there's anything new under the sun that I could say I've created. I think that you take elements. I think like Bruce Lee had the best line in Jeet Kune Do. He's like, take what works, reject what doesn't. There's nothing more complicated than that, right? Mm-hmm. He invented Jeet Kune Do, but he just studied he was a tremendous master of a lot of martial arts. And he said, I know what works for me, and I'm going to put this into a style that's true to myself. So you can't be successful being somebody else. There are other coaches who like I admire and I think they're incredible and I'd love to be them, but I'm not them. I can't. I'm not them. I'm going to fail trying to be them. So I don't do it. But what I try to do is I try to work with coaches. I think one of the reasons I've been successful is I try to work with coaches that make me deeply uncomfortable. So I just started working with a new coach about 5 months ago now. And when I read his profile and I learned about him and we had our first meeting, I'm like, man, forget about this guy. He's like a shaman. He lives in the Yucatan Peninsula. I'm like, he's woo-woo. This is not the guy for me. I'm like, what's he talking about? And then like, I started thinking weeks later, I'm like, what is it about him that makes me so uncomfortable? What is it about him
makes me react so
that
much.
Makes me so reactive? What is it about him that makes me shut down and think maybe like I'm better than this or like I'm superior to this? What is it? And I bit hard and swallowed and I signed with him for 6 months. I said, I'm concerned. Let's do a month. We did a month together. And I said, okay. Some really interesting things came out. Some really deep things came out. And I said, okay, before I change my mind, let's sign up for 7 months together. I'm going to pay you right now. And, we meet once a week. Sometimes we do immersive sessions where we'll do like 3 hours of like very strong journaling and work together. But he's asked me questions and taken me through exercises that I never would have gone through before.
When do you know you're done with a coach? You say you've had multiple ones. Is it at the end of the program or what else?
That's a good question. Usually, I think what's happened in the past is that something has come to replace that. It's almost like if I look at, I use a lot of analogies, but let's say I'm coaching you and we open the door and we're walking through a long hallway, a long, endless hallway. We're going to keep walking together. And at some point, there are doors. And at some point, for whatever reason, you're like, I feel like I want to walk through this door. I feel like it's time to exit this hallway and go through this door, right? Something else beckons to you. And usually that's healthy. Mm-hmm. That's healthy. A good coach will say, we've had good time together. Like, I enjoy your time on that door. You know where I am. You know where to find me, right? I just had a call.
Have you gone back to past coaches?
I had a call on Monday with a coach from 15 years ago, 16 years ago. I had a call on Monday. His name is Randall too. It's crazy. We joke about that all the time. But I had a call with him because like I tremendously admire him and what he does and his work. And at this point in my life, I specifically want to reach out to him about some specific things. And it's great to connect just on a different level. But every coaching relationship naturally feels like it has its arc. And I think you
just know it. You just feel it.
Yeah.
Or there's another opportunity.
Yeah, you get it. You naturally feel it. You feel like you got what you came here for, right? And the truth is like it's mutual. Both people, and even the coach will say, like I feel like you've like graduated past this. Like, and I think maybe one last thing I'll say is I think about I had a wonderful therapist for 3 years. Like I love her to death. When my son was born, I said, "You're her godmother. You're my son's godmother." I think it's beautiful. And what I realized is, even for years after I'd stopped seeing her, her name was Carmen. Even for years after I'd stopped seeing her, I had her head in my voice. I could tune her in. I could bring Carmen in, and I had spent so many immersive sessions with her that I could have a discussion with Carmen in my head. What would Carmen say about this?
The AI version of Carmen in your head.
Yeah. Right? You can internalize that person's perspective. And I think that might be when you say to yourself, you're like, okay, you're like, I feel good. I got a portable you. I have your wisdom, your perspective in me.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Time is running out.
Okay.
Randall.
We
still have time, but
okay.
like we're getting to the end, and like we've talked about a lot of things, but I feel we could have talked about so many other things. Is there something you feel like could add to what we've been talking about? We didn't talk long about your new role as a coach. Maybe you have something you'd like to add.
I don't know what to say. The only thing I would say is that more and more independent thinking is in short supply. I think if there's one thing that I want to get across, like to you as an investor, to people listening to the podcast, right, that it's in short supply, and that to the extent that people read and listen to perspectives that are outside of their own and lean into discomfort or confusion, that's where the growth comes, really.
How are you teaching your oldest son to be an independent thinker at this point?
I had that discussion with somebody the other day, and for me, having a kid is not very different than your relationship with anybody else, in that you have to try to meet them.
You have such an important role to him.
I have an important role to him, and to answer your question, I have to meet him where he is. And I think one of my biggest challenges as a parent has been putting myself in the eyes and mind and heart of a little boy who's 3 feet tall. And, like I'm his dad, but like he's my son. I'm his dad. I can't just see things from like my perspective to him. I have to go into his world and see what does it look like? What does it look like for him? And I think I take the same philosophy with my son as I do with coaching clients or life. I think like life philosophy is, it's universal, right? Like, I don't know who he is. That's the truth. I don't.
But he seems to kind of have that character of yours that wants to do his thing.
He has some character of me. He has some character of my wife. And yet he is his own independent soul. Mm-hmm. Who is he? What is he? I don't know. He'll discover as I discover. But my only role is to help him be more himself. Like one of my favorite things I like to say is should is one of the worst words for an adult to use. I should do this. I should. I shouldn't. I should. I shouldn't. It's a parent-child word. You, Leo, you're an adult. There's nothing you should do, with one exception. How do you decide what you should do or what you shouldn't do as an adult? And my best answer to that I've come up with thus far is that I should do anything that is true to my nature, and I should not do anything that is not true to my nature and values. And so that's how I think about my son. Of course, I have to try as a parent to protect him from mortal danger.
Hmm.
But other than that, I got to stay pretty far away from prescriptive advice.
I have a friend I think you absolutely have to meet, and you could collaborate with their organization. It's called TKS. I don't know if you're familiar with the
TKS?
Knowledge Society.
No.
It's an international
Okay.
organization
I like
that I think you should know. And we were having this chat about raising children, and he brought up this word that resonated so much with me, and it's cultivating disobedience as a way of pushing these younger people to be themselves and to actually, I don't know if you understand where it comes from with this word, but
It's a great term.
it's stayed with me since. And every time I also have a son, right? And every time I decide whether I should oppose what Tom wants, or because that's not in line with what we're doing, or whatever, or if I should, um, I should cultivate disobedience in him so that he.
Hmm. There's a great line. Someone said, "We spend our first 3 years with our children trying to get them to walk and to talk, and we spend the next 17 years trying to get them to sit down and shut up." And people forget about cultivating disobedience. I always find it's interesting to think about the opposite of something. What's the opposite of cultivating disobedience?
Cultivating obedience. I'm very uncomfortable with that idea.
Obedience has so many connotations to it. And one of them is that the person or philosophy or political system or institution that you are obeying is right and correct, right? Um, it, it abdicates a sense of free thinking. And the truth is, society only progresses on the back of its disobedience. Of that's all, right? People who say like that's simply not, that's simply not right. That's just wrong. It's dead wrong, right? People said Galileo,
First
right?
Amendment,
Well,
the U.S. Like,
but we can go even simpler, right? Newton came along and said, no, it's not random how one body hits another body and it moves. There is a law. It's not random. Newton said, like, you're wrong. There are like motions, elliptical motions that all bodies follow. You're wrong. And Newton created like a quantum leap in knowledge. And Einstein came along and said, you're wrong. You're wrong. This is the received knowledge of 200 years. This is the received knowledge. This is we read the Principia Mathematica. We read the magnum opus, right? This is the Bible of physics and mathematics. He said it's wrong. It's wrong. And then who came after that? Max Planck came and said, Einstein, there's a little thing called quantum mechanics, and like, you're not wrong, but you're not right either. So disobedience, everybody gets excoriated for it, and we don't do enough to cultivate it as a school, like in the school system, like as a society. We don't. It doesn't keep the factory humming. It's tough to cultivate it, but just to take it one step further, like if you want to cultivate disobedience in somebody else, you first have to inculcate it into yourself. And you've decided, what do I not agree with? What does everybody else agree with that I don't agree with? What is normal that is not normal?
you're right. It comes again to the best thing you can do with your children is just be the best version of yourself. And if that involves being more disobedient and being more true to yourself,
I think
That's
one of the
the
best
best.
things you could do with your children is travel, really travel. I've been to about 50 countries. I've been very privileged. And if there's one of my biggest takeaway I've taken from travel, it's that the word normal has no definition whatsoever. No such thing. What you think is bonkers, balls out crazy over here or there is completely normal otherwise.
Mhm.
From the simple to the mundane, you know? I think of the first time I went to Japan. It sounds like a silly example, but it really tells you about a culture. The first time I went to Japan, me and my wife were flying to Tokyo, and we had our airline meal. And you eat your food on the airline, you make a big mess on your plate. And me and my wife have our tray, and it's piled up, and she has her tray, and it's piled up. We look around, and it's full of Japanese people. And after everybody ate, they took their meal, they put everything back, comme il faut, they put the aluminum back on, and it was back in its original form. I said, wow, okay. Normal is different in different places,
Hmm.
right?
And I guess that helps a lot with questioning everything because
Questioning what's capable, what's not capable. I was in
Mhm.
Ethiopia. I was in Gondar. So Addis Ababa is the capital. Addis Ababa is still like a real capital city. Gondar is an hour flight. An hour flight in Ethiopia. It might be a 1 hour flight, but it's like a 3,000 year time machine. So I'm in the middle of Gondar, which is exactly what you picture it like in your mind. It's the middle of like the Ethiopian hinterland, and I'm driving with my guide, and I see nothing, 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 and then I see a 7-year-old boy standing on the side of the road with a staff, like a stick. Just no joke. Nothing, 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 nothing. 7-year-old boy, nothing as far as you can see. We drive by, and I say, "What was that? What was that boy doing in the middle of the road?" And he said, "Oh, he said, that boy's a shepherd." He said that boy counts the flock, grazes the flock, lets them go out, recounts them, brings them back home. He said, you can bet he never loses a sheep, never ever loses one. So you talk about normal. What is the normal level of expectation for a 6-year-old in North America? What do we think they can and cannot do?
Mhm.
And yet, what do you see in another place that they're actually capable of doing? And we can keep on going, you know,
Mhm.
we can keep on going.
Traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can never travel too much.
You can never travel too much. It it's really
We could go on and
yeah,
on about
it
traveling like, as an art form. Like I really love discussing with you,
yeah.
Randall, and I'm glad we touched on education because that's something I'm sure you have great thoughts on, and I really hope you'll come for a part two. 'Cause,
I'd love to come for part two. We can talk about we can get into education in part two because I'm currently interviewing schools for my son, and I've gone the gamut from all the way left to all the way right, and I still haven't decided yet. And there's a lot to think about. I've even thought about homeschooling, so
yeah, I know.
I have a lot of questions about that. I have more questions than answers, so maybe next time I'll have more answers than questions.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to share with the audience? Something you're looking for at the moment, or that you're sharing, or
Um, I'm not looking for anything in particular.
right
People know how
on.
to reach me. If anything, that I said resonates with somebody, they could reach out to me. I think they could reach out to you, and they'll know where to find me.
Mhm.
Like I said, I don't have social media. I don't have a website. It might sound kind of like backwards, but it's how I've chosen to run my business, and it works for me. I do have a LinkedIn profile. But in general, if anything resonates, I'm happy to to speak to anybody in your audience member who wants to learn more about potential avenue or a book or an assessment or have an initial conversation.
And that final question I like to ask is if you could write something on a billboard that everyone in the world could see and read, what would you put on it?
The most insightful cliche that I keep on coming back to over and over in my head and my life is the map is not the territory.
Hmm.
People need to remember that, right? Your representation of something is not the actual thing. Leo is your name. But that's not who you are. That's the map. You're Leo, you have a social insurance number, you have an address. That's the map. But if I think that I know you because I know those details about you, I'm dead wrong. That's not the territory. The territory is granular. It's important. It's infinite. And people confuse the two at their own risk. The way they identify themselves, the way they look at other things in the world, they think they understand them. So I would put that there as a constant reminder. And you have Tony Robbins over there on your bookshelf. And I think in one of his first books, maybe like written 30 years ago, he talks about that. It's one of the first concepts in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, that the map is not the territory. Get to know what the real thing is. It's infinitely more. The territory is more complex. It's more rich. It's more fun. It's more rewarding. Don't live your life on the map.
Thank you so much, man.
My pleasure. Great to be here.